right there. Hello. Check. Hello. Hello. Ready to go. Ready to go. Ready to go. Check. Hello. Are we ready to go? Check. Hello. Are we ready to go? Check. Hello. Are we ready to go? So quiet. Let's keep that silence by remembering to check our cell phones. Yes. Remember that there is a survey online. We would like to hear what you think. You can go to coa.edu/Champlain Institute and find the survey there so we can make continuous improvement here. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, the Compass Group and the Fisher Charitable Foundation. And if any of you out there would like to become a sponsor of the Champlain Institute, you can, of course, come find me afterward and hide your wallets. So, welcome. This is it. This is the final session of the third year of the Champlain Institute. I'm Darren Collins. I'm the president and an alumnus of this wonderful academic institution. And I've been watching talks all week, and it's always dangerous to give the president the microphone and the kind of last setup, because who knows what can happen. I've been sitting there saying, oh, I've got so many good stories I want to tell, but I am not going to do that. So I'm guessing we've all put on a few pounds from the blueberry and raspberry baked goods, the wine and the pork dumplings. I'm also hoping that we've fed our brain with curiosity and a desire to understand and change the world that we live in. I think we have. I also hope that you leave this week with an understanding of just how perfect the match is between this year's theme and the College of the Atlantic. We ask our college to think broadly. Everyone in the college has got to think broadly. And in so many cases, we've seen breadth in action on this stage. And so embracing that breadth, I am pleased to announce that the theme of our fourth summer will in fact be road surfacing techniques in northern Maine. And Ted Widmer will come back for that. Very excited by that. No, I'm seriously for a second. Think of Ted's breadth on stage. Think of Mbolo Mbue's breadth as she explored what it meant to be a white male Lehman Brothers executive. Artists, I think, are always ethnographers, and they step out of their own skins into others' skins. And like anthropologists, artists broaden our understanding of humanity. As a college, we also embrace rascality, which we've talked a lot, which I like to define as a smart, creative, and playful response to some injustice. And I think of Ashley James and her discussion and exploration of Aunt Jemima with that clenched fist and a shotgun. Taking on very serious subject matter with a bit of edgy playfulness is also what we heard about when John Wilmerding last night talked about Bingham's ironic political art, or when Ai Weiwei was stuffing toy panda bears with shredded NSA documents. But as a former employee of the World Wildlife Fund, I felt that was a little bit distasteful. And then finally, as a college, we believe the practice of art to be a fundamental characteristic of what it means to be human and an essential component of our education. Because science has failed us, or more precisely, as a species, we've failed ourselves through science. When we've replaced wonder and curiosity with power as the motivating force behind doing science, we lost our way. As important as art might be in tackling specific cases of injustice or discontent, on a much more fundamental level, art re-inspires our global sense of wonder. It refocuses humanity's attention on something other than consumerism and power acquisition. So it's reach, rascality, action, and art, all part of that special sauce that is the College of the Atlantic. So Champlain Institute is a really important endeavor for the College of the Atlantic. This college I love with all my heart. And I think Will Thorndike described it well when he said the flywheel of enthusiasm has really begun to spin. And all of us here have the opportunity to make this event something even more special. The Institute is a way we can reach out to the community and to the world on really big issues, right? My promise to all of you as we think about the years ahead, keep it small, keep it scrappy, keep it informal, increase the presence of COA students and faculty because they're why we're here, increase the level of interaction between presenter and discussants and listeners, continue to balance entertainment, learning, and action, just like Bryn Musser did when he founded Riot Media. We want you to leave this place ready and prepared to do something. Finally, someone said to me, hey, this, Champlain Institute, it reminds me of the Chautauqua, but, a decade ago when it was less institutionalized. And that was a great compliment, I believe, to the Institute. And I never want someone else saying at some other festival in the future, oh, this reminds me of the Champlain Institute, but a decade ago when it was less institutionalized. So with all that in mind, thank you. Thank you all, participants, speakers, Lynn, all of the sound, everybody that has made this possible. Thank all of you. Thanks to all of you. We're going to close the week with a discussion between Judith Goldstein and Julián Zugazagoitia with a talk entitled Art in the Time of Discontent. Judy is going to give Julian's background, but let me say that Judy is the executive director of Humanity in Action, an organization she herself founded in 1997. Humanity in Action started as an approach to understanding the Holocaust as the prime example of what happens when democracy fails, when society collapses because of a lack of democracy. HIA, as an organization in response, works to promote human rights, diversity, and active citizenship by engaging university students and young professionals. Judy has been a mentor to me, a mentor to Lynn, a mentor to the college. She was one of the founders of the Champlain Institute, one of her many creations. We just would not have been able to pull it off without you, Judy. So, Julián and Judy, welcome to the stage.
Okay. Here. So, hello, everybody.
Hello.
We're going to have fun. It's going to be very interesting. I'm going to start by just looking at the book. Yep.
Away from your mouth, okay?
Where is it?
Here. Let me do this. Perhaps.
Is that better? Okay. No?
Let's see if I can.
I can hold it if it doesn't work.
Here.
Is that it? That's it. Oh, good. So I'm going to do something which I shouldn't do, which is I'm going to go into this book and I'm going to say something about Julián, which is that he is, most importantly, the director and the CEO of the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. He was born in Mexico City, educated at the Sorbonne, the École du Louvre in France, and he's worked at a number of institutions, including UNESCO, the Getty Conservation Institute, the Guggenheim Museum, the Museo del Barrio in the Americas. He is also on the board of the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts in New York, and on the board of the Kansas City Art Institute.
School of the Arts there, yeah.
So, let me start by saying thank you for several things. One is for joining us this week from Kansas City.
Oh, my honor. My pleasure.
Well, it's just wonderful for taking a leading role in sharing these issues in this wonderful place. And the second is to thank you for your opening remarks and your remarks interspersed throughout the week, which have sort of held it together, as has Lynn and Darren. But those comments, I think, have sort of positioned us throughout the week. In framing this final conversation, I'd like to suggest that we expand the topic to the following: museums in the age of discontent and exploration, experimentation, and rejuvenation.
Totally.
You are the director of an encyclopedia museum, a museum on the level of, similar to the Detroit Museum of Art, the Cleveland Museum. So explain to us exactly what encyclopedic means in this day and age.
In this day and age, and again, it's really the notion of an encyclopedic museum comes from something that I find it's also today perhaps a dying species, the notion that things and knowledge can come from the encyclopedia. So the encyclopedia is, again, the 18th century ideal that all knowledge can come together. And museums of art, like ours, are founded in that premise that you can bring art from all over the world to, in a way, have at your disposition the best creations of humankind in a place so that you can make sense of human creation. So that's the embodiment of what an encyclopedic museum should be.
Will you tell us a bit more about your
Of the particular one.
amazing
So
museum?
the Nelson Atkins, here you see, the first image you see is our classic building. We were created in the 1930s, and the big symbol that has become now the symbol of Kansas City is Klaus Oldenburg and his wife's shuttlecock. And then just imagine being a giant playing badminton and using that very austere building as your net. So that's the symbol, and that has taken off. Now, how many people, just show of hand, has visited Kansas City or the Nelson Atkins? Oh, we have a good number, fabulous, all right. Those are the persons who can have two questions instead of one, okay, at the end. The other question that I would venture is, so Kansas City and the Nelson Atkins are part, again, of a series of museums that were created all around the United States around 100 years ago. You can see here, we were in a land that was somehow the suburbs, but now it's the central heart of Kansas City. You see here our newest acquisitions on the right-hand side, a Roxy Payne dendroid that looks like a tree, and on the left-hand side, Labyrinth by a great artist. And then here you have on the right-hand side, you see the new building that was a 2007 addition by Stephen Hall, who's actually about to inaugurate also in about a month the Washington now, the music is the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. They're also having an expansion in Washington, D.C., and it's also designed by Stephen Hall. And if it glows just like this in the night, it's going to be just an amazing structure. We're funding in the 30s, so at a height of Kansas City, the person that you see in the medallion is our founder, Mr. Rockhill William Nelson, and his fortune comes, he's also an immigrant into Kansas City in the sense that he's not a native of Kansas City. He comes to Kansas City, wants to make Kansas City better. There's a lot of impetus in that. And he makes his fortune by creating the Kansas City Star, a newspaper. Who could imagine 100 years later that you cannot make a fortune printing paper? At those times, he not only made a fortune, but also established his newspaper as a place to debate and hold people accountable to making Kansas City greater. Upon his death and that of Ms. Atkins, two families that had ties together through one good trustee, comes the Nelson Atkins as envisioned what they dreamed. They wanted to have a great museum because a great city deserves a great museum. So this is the 1933, we opened our doors. We were already committed to education. Our docent program and educators from the onstart bring our collections to life. We were pioneers in high technology, and in 1930s, as Kansas City, the song goes, we were up to date with acoustic guides that were delivered electronically. We've been doing some improvements on this end, but not much has changed. But the pillars of our collections are definitely, we're very well known internationally for our incredible Chinese collections. And here you see two of our masterpieces, the Guanyin of the Seven Seas, and you'll see also one of our famous scrolls for which we are very known. And you have here the Labyrinth of Robert Morris. Our sculpture park is also very, very important to us, and it is where nature and art integrate as a welcoming mat to everyone in Kansas City. And so as much as the museum is open by regular hours, our sculpture park is open every day and 24 hours. So you can enjoy that.
And now you have an exhibition which is quite important and connected to the conversation this morning.
So yeah, as I was listening to this wonderful exhibition that I had also the pleasure to see with our board member and trustee Neil Carbank when we were in New York in January, the exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum echoes in a way the exhibition we're presenting right now called 30 Americans. So I posed a question earlier in the week about the notion of, are museums today doing enough or doing what it's needed to, one, re-look at the canon, reestablish a canon, and are we worthy of displaying art that at one point we're not displaying? So of course it was a rhetoric question, because my answer to that is, yes, we should do, and we should do more. And we are today presenting this exhibition that is the result also of many years of collecting, as I will show you later. But this exhibition, in a way, continues where the other one stops, insofar that these are a younger generation, more or less 2 or 3 decades of contemporary artists. You see here, for instance, a Nick Cave in the foreground. You see here the installation, and this is a show that we worked 2-3 years. That it comes from the collection of the Rubels, who were pioneers in collecting African-American artists. And we worked also with a lot of community members, both from the African-American community in Kansas City, but also from the clergy, from different constituents, because we wanted to make sure, on the one side, that the African-Americans' stories were well translated and well understood, but on the other side, that other points of view were just as incredible to debate, and to make sure that also we had very difficult pieces that we decided to bring into the show, and others that were more lighthearted, but the idea was to show beauty, to show disruption, to show angst, to show resistance, so that it was also, and for instance here in Amicalin Thomas, also the beauty of the black body, or their own assertion of how to portrait that. And this has reminiscences, of course, of, you can go all the way to Matisse, to contemporary art, but it is the emblematic body and the collage that makes it a very powerful art. And of course, one of the highlights, and this is more or less the end of the exhibition, towards the end, we have a beautiful selection of Kehinde Wiley's, and this is one of the most incredible pieces of art. It's of course a deposition of the cross in some kind of, when your eye can already see art historically, this is that, but it's also almost one of the most powerful images of a black body represented in art as we see it. The other painting, very famous, is like he uses symbols of European painting to dignify African-American subjects, and here in the background you see this, of course, representation of Charles IV, and taking representation. He's also the artist that depicted President Obama, and the attendance at the portrait gallery has triplified, if not quadruplied, just because of that portrait and that of Michelle Obama also. So the question is, how an exhibition by itself has to engage into its community, and how we bring in people to dialogues. And so we want to be, as we say, a place where that dialogue can happen. As a museum today, the responsibility is not only to show art, but show art that is, one, backed by the thousands of years of history that we have in our walls, but that also moves the needle to the future. And I think an exhibition like this, what you don't see very clearly, but there is a little board on the left-hand side of the image, and that board, we're requiring and asking people to give us analog versions and comments. It's a comment card. So at the end of the day, you have there a little cards that you can fill in, and then you put them. And every week I get the summary of all the comments that people are giving. And it is so emotional on the one side, but so illustrative of how the conversation is moving. So we're not only measuring anecdotally, we're getting a lot of information of why people are reacting to this art and what they want to see as a consequence of that.
What have you learned from their comments?
So if you remember, I asked earlier in the week also who did not feel represented in a museum, or that if you had gone to a museum, if you felt that you were not represented, and very few hands showed up. I think we could agree in saying that when we go to a museum, it's an experience that we're only accustomed to see. There's an experience that we feel we fit right into the discourse of the museums of Western art for the most part. Or that if we're seeing art that is not from a Western tradition, we're not looking for a mirror of ourselves. But what we've learned in this, and in particular in engaging with a younger audience and also a younger African-American audience in particular, is that the Kahindi Wiley, for instance, seeing a depiction of an African-American in a glorious boat is something very self-fulfilling and rewarding. And so that indicates that notion that the museum has to look a little bit like oneself, so that to make it more penetrable, make it more welcoming, is a very important issue that we're not only discussing but embracing too.
Does it represent a sense of pushing back against the society, of vulnerability, of anger, of a sense of the unfairness of being kept out?
So what I think the museum is being embraced positively, and again, I think that is where I think if we do our job well as an institution, I think we can be a process and help the process not only of democracy, but also of bringing people from different backgrounds understand each other better. It is a place of dialogue, but it can be a safe dialogue, an enriching dialogue of sorts. And it is happening. And I'll share an anecdote that actually Neil witnessed with me in a minute. But here you have, for instance, the ending of the show again with three hooded African Americans. So the notion of the hoodie that is also because a young man was wearing a hood was killed. So there's so many layers to see a piece like this today. And on the other side, because it's a triptych, they appear like a Saint Trinity. You know, so there is a religious element of this painting, but also so it's bringing back and giving dignity to the subject matter that I think has empowered a lot of our visitors. And we didn't know how to end this show, and there was, again, a wonderful piece that we could end up, that there's many portraits. It's the multiplicity of portraits. That also, there's not one portrait that would represent everyone. It's a multiplicity and the pixelization. And the exhibition is well received. We're gratified. It's a short run. We'll end it at the end of the month. So if anyone wants to see it in Kansas City, come this week. We're leaving tomorrow. Ride with us. We'll drive all the way there. But on the other side is how do you do a lasting and an important contribution? Because this is a temporary show, so all of these works are not ours. They'll go back to their lenders, to their lenders. It's the collection. The collection is the DNA of any institution. And so even, I don't think we would have had the response to a show like that had we not been doing for the last 10 years already a very profound work with the African American community. And that is buying works of art. So for instance, this is a piece that we bought 10 years ago. That is Charles White. And this is called Goodnight Irene. And it was a piece that we could acquire, and we made also an effort to bring a lot of people into contributing. If I put the credit line, it's pages of people who contributed, because we did it. There was 2 major donors, but also we invited others if you wanted to contribute, to make a process of making sure everyone could contribute. Very lengthy process, but it is a magical piece that now a lot of people feel they belong to them too. And Charles White was also the professor and the teacher of Kerry James Marshall. And this is our great Kerry James Marshall that we bought like 15 years ago, we were pioneering also in buying art. Now he had a retrospective at the Met Breuer before Charles White had a retrospective. And that is also an interesting phenomenon that we could go into detail, that younger contemporary artists of African American culture have become more visible. And because of their visibility, they're bringing now visibility also to their teachers. So I think we're catching up with the times. Another artist that I absolutely adore is Fred Eversley. And Fred Eversley has been a friend for many, many years. And he's an African-American artist also that was not representational, and for many years had more difficult to enter into the mainstream because people were expecting representational works of art. And he's dealing with something very subversive. And when we're talking about there's so many ways of subverting. But for him, subversion was being an African-American artist, dealing with new materials. He's using plastic at a time that very few, this is the 60s. He's doing glass lenses that also could almost kill him because there was polymers involved. And so he's using non-traditional materials to do art, and art that he feels also is so progressive, and he should not be denied of doing that because of who he was. Recent acquisition, Nick Cave, who has a lot of sound suits also on the show, but this is a very important piece for him. We also, sometimes now also Simone Leigh, who has won many accolades and many prestigious prizes, the Hugo Boss. Right now, if you go to the Guggenheim, she has a whole Hugo Boss Prize award galleries devoted to her. But we bought that before. Today, maybe we could not afford it had we not bought it at the right time. So the market, and I think we alluded to that, also has a lot to do with celebrating and bringing into the connection. But the fact that we're rooting the collection also gives us, I think, better dialogue. And now we also have a festival called Juneteenth, and so every year we celebrate African American legacies through that celebration and brings families together. But this is our most recent gift. Also, some patrons, the Hoffmans, gave us this painting that was perhaps the treasure of their own collection, and they are now noticing how this is moving the needle. And the anecdote I wanted to share is, today we see what are favorite works of art just because of social media. So whatever you post, if you put the hashtag Nelson Atkins, or we start looking at that, and we're seeing this painting has been tweeted and selfies in front of it by so many people in our community because all of a sudden they see a dialogue. But I had a very interesting conversation with that patron that said, hey, why is that art? He's not dressed nicely. Why are we representing our culture like that? Art shouldn't be enhancing and enlightening, and I don't find that wearing football, and also it's not even our local team, this is the Dallas Cowboys team, and you hear that, and it was someone that was posing the right questions, and answering was the beginning of a dialogue. And that is what I find beautiful, is that we can have a dialogue, and someone can come up to us, and our docents, our volunteers, all are trained to try to steer, and if we cannot have the conversation, to tell them where to go to, or who on our staff is trained to have a conversation. But this is a person that has given us works of art and everything, and she's really battling with some of these works. And I said to her, well, in 100 years, just let's portray this in 100 years, what will this tell us about? Maybe you feel that this person or this character is not dressed, but in 100 years, this will be vantage look of how even a sports suit looked at the beginning of the 20th century. And therefore, the fact also that we're empowering someone that might look like a rapper or that culture is giving a sense of history. So I always look at works of art trying to look back, what are the influences that this piece of art might have had? And definitely Kaheniwell is really looking at art historical references, and this is based on a religious painting. And of course, the two symbols that he has could be attributed to a saint. But in this world, he's of course giving that power to someone that looks like a sports person or like a rapper. And I think it's such a telling of our times. Now, who has watched? This is, for the visual arts, what I think the most defining piece of art will be for the beginning of the 20th century. And it is the musical. And we were discussing, some people in my family don't like musicals, but it's still a debate. But Tasha yeah, she's like, yeah. But Hamilton, the musical, is the defining piece of art of the first beginning of the 21st century. Who has seen the musical or listened to the lyrics? Highly encouraged to see it. You might like it, you might not like it, but it is in many ways a piece that puts so many things in perspective, and that look, if I had been an investor in Broadway and Lin-Manuel Miranda, who I happen to know, would have come and say, look, I want you to invest in a historical piece about our founding fathers, no one would think that that would have caught the fire it caught, but it was the time, it was the right piece at the right time. Anyway. That's to talk about music too.
Okay.
Yeah, from Wagner to...
Okay, let's go back to one of the topics of the week.
Yes.
Which is dissent.
Dissent. Mm-hmm.
Would you identify some works from your museum or other collections that exemplify dissent, and dissent not just in subject matter, but in form, from just, say, idols to performance art?
So we'll take that journey, but let's begin by just thinking that all art, I would say, is a form of dissent. All art that has come to notice and has come to existence was a way of showing the world or showing one's emotion in a way that had not been seen before. And that is what catches our imagination. And what I'm thinking is, that is what also makes progress in the languages. If you're conforming to what exists, you're just perhaps displaying it or relating it. But if you're an artist, you're transforming it, and you're making things seen in a different way. So things that actually some of the images that we've prepared here is more things I wish we had in our collection. But because I wanted also to tease you to come and see the collection, and then we can discuss what we don't have or we should have.
Or what they can help you buy.
Or help, exactly, help us get. Now, this is a very rare thing. There's no more available for public institutions. There's only one in private hands in New York. But the Scream comes in 4 versions, actually. But the Scream, I think, is one of those moments of the essential, whether it's anticipating already the chaos that World War I will be, but also, and more importantly, I think this also reflects what the end of the 19th century is all about. It's about the discovery of the self, the discovery of how angst can be found in oneself. And perhaps if we're living today anxious times, when we see this painting, doesn't it portray all of us when we're saying, oh God, the news today? This feels exactly home. And this is both formal, because it is also a language that is already expressionist for its time. It's very novel. It's breaking some of the conventions of how you depict things. And it's also trying to depict things not as they are, but as they're felt. So this is also a way of externalizing what it is, the feelings that you have. So that is already a form and a content. And another one that I would say now from a very more formal point of view, this is, of course, Le Demoiselle d'Avignon from Picasso. And Picasso worked for this work of art almost in secret at the beginning, then started bringing some of his friends, Braque and Léger and other of his circle. And for 10 years, he never showed it publicly because it was only showing it privately. And it started to begin to have a myth status almost. And what he was doing, he was breaking so many conventions. Today, we have accepted it so much, but it's difficult almost to put ourselves in the position of saying, this was incomprehensible. The eye could not see it, the intellect could not understand it. The friends around Picasso are saying, you're destroying everything we stand for. So there is also from an artistic point of view, not less on a commentary on society, but it's like we're breaking the rules, we're making our own rules. And I think artists, that is dissent in that form. No?
Yeah, absolutely. And the next images?
Well, the next image, and we are living, when we're saying the times we're living, I want to frame it, the last 20 years have been defined, at least in my personal life, for one event. And I was in New York on 9/11. And I want to share some images that link, when you live something like that and you're there and the crispness of the image and they translate, you say, how does art history help us? Or when you feel that you're at the end of a world, how do you interpret that? And I started thinking, and we have been in times, and this is a wonderful rendition, this is medieval times of the end of the world. So there's many ends of the world that we can relate to, and artists are always trying to accommodate their ways in which they're looking at the end of the world in such a Manichaeistic world as our Judeo-Christian traditions, this is a representation of hell. But this is also what perhaps those towers in that moment felt reacting. Closer to us, I was thinking also, well, what are other times that people have seen an end of a world, an end of something, a transition from something to another? And of course, a subject I'm close to just by birth, the Mexican Revolution, not by age yet, but it's feeling like that. I'm getting there too. But this is 1910. And this is also another thing that I wanted to bring, is that image. The image starts to become also an art form. Photography. This is Casasola, a great group of photographers. So Casasola is also a studio. So Casasola is an individual, but also then he has a studio depicting and taking the pictures that define the recollection that we have today of the Mexican Revolution. But the Mexican Revolution then inspires the muralist movement, and it is both looking back for the muralists, Orozco, Siqueiros, Rivera, looking backwards to the tradition of muralism in Europe, but saying, how does that tell the story of a new nation? And look at this incredible forest of arms and guns and sombreros and something like this. And so the art is starting also to give us a depiction of a reality that is lived. And the formal sides of some of these murals equate and bring back also traditions of our depicting in art history. So I think the image and the unsettled notion of what events are going, sometimes the artists look back and help us digest it and transform it, but also it is a way to allow us to transcend it. And both the beauty of the form makes it that we can look at it perhaps with a closer proximity than the pictures that were more realistic. And I had some other images of Casasola for virtue of just focusing. We take them out, but there's some images that are so difficult to bear, while you see a drama that is even maybe in grander scale through a mural, and that allows us perhaps to have a closeness. So both art puts it at a distance that we can then reflect and contemplate. So even closer to us?
Even closer.
Even closer to us in time. I mean, I'm just making, of course, we all recognize the Guernica as the height of the terrible things that happened in Spain through the Civil War, but that also is the antechamber to Second World War. So this is Picasso in the middle of Guernica having been bombed, that I tell you is a predecessor to Second World War, using only a very limited palette of black and white. A lot of people have said that it is because he was receiving the news through a newspaper. Newspapers were only in black and white, and so that is the language he's using, the images of Guernica being bombarded to create this epic that is now today perhaps the emblem for destruction beyond the anecdote, or beyond, not anecdote, but because the historical precise moment of Guernica. If we changed the name, it would still be the appalling horrors of war.
Absolutely.
And to end Second World War, just to give also the power of the image. This image represents the ending of Second World War. So those are moments of dissent, but also of hope in a way. And images, I think, in our world, we're so used to images and to digest them. And at one point during this week, we were discussing Bingham yesterday, and this is a joyful moment, no? This image is a joyful moment. These are the flat barges going down the Missouri River. Bingham is, of course, the character we discussed yesterday. But what I was seeing these images, and there was some recent 2-3 years ago, in the disruption of people's lives, when people are starting to emigrate in Europe and everything, there were some images that started to come to my mind. Look how different the joyful going in America rivers versus this is Géricault's depiction of a shipwreck, le radeau de la Méduse. But look at this image, and when I saw this in the newspaper, the first thing I thought was that radeau de la Méduse. How art helps us even understand plight and the suffering, and how some elements of composition make this photograph an amazing photograph, seizing a moment, again, of humankind. I have another one that is just as tragic, and you all remembered, and again, this went around the world. And when I saw this image of this young boy dead, being rescued in this island by this police officer, there was something tender in that image that also made it, and I think, again, it's because we're thinking of at the position of the cross. So we're thinking of all the sentiments that through our culture, visual culture, we are ingrained. You know? And so those were some of the of moments of disruption, and again, migration is what has made those routes of migration the best and the worst in society, but also allowed art to flourish in different parts, cuisines to be different. Two days ago, we were talking about, again, another disruptor. And if today there's an artist that is both revered and persecuted in his own country, Ai Weiwei, you know that he was incarcerated for over 80 days to remove his passport. His passport is being given back. But he's irreverent, both in form and content. Here, for instance, Ai Weiwei is dropping Han Dynasty urns. So he bought it, it's his. He can do whatever he wants. And he is, in a very intellectual or conceptual art form, letting it go, documenting all this. But isn't that irreverent also to art from the past and saying, we can do that? So it's subversive. And that is very formal. This is also very subversive. But as you see, he's an equal opportunity subverter. It's not only China that he's criticizing. And this series, he did it, I think in the 80s. And in this notion, what I think is most important is the freedom of speech of doing those things. And I think that is what, he's so intelligent and clever. He wanted to live back in China and subvert the system from within. And the system from within was subvertive to the point in which he could no longer be there. Yeah. The same case is, some of you know Tania Bruguera. She's a Cuban artist. She lives now in the US. Again, an artist that has been trying to subvert the system in Cuba by doing some performances there. Now she's doing, as performance art, as an artist, she's going to be running for president of Cuba to insert herself as an artist in the discourse of how far an artist could push the boundaries. She has been incarcerated many times in Cuba. Her passport has been removed. The fact that she has dual citizenship today with the USA helps enormously in that. And here you see a performance in which she has a dove, again, the symbol of peace and expression. And she did this performance in Cuba before being, again, arrested, and all the people that performed that were arrested. Now, of course, let's end on a high note of some of these images of rupture, because artists also sometimes are disruptors by their sense of humor, by making us see things, like comedians also. Many of you perhaps, instead of reading the news, try to go to the late night shows because they give us the news, but at least they're more palpable. But this week, and Lynn was referring to that in her intro a few days ago, two artists created those if there's a problematizing element, it's this frontier, this wall between Mexico and the US, and some artists created the swings along the slats of the wall and invited people from each side of the wall to join. So is this a beautiful symbol of being two countries that can be playful with one another, despite despite of that wall? Anyway, so those are some ways of artists being disruptive and showing their discontent, but also opening the ways and paving the future.
Yeah. Let me turn, with a bit of time left, to the institution of the museum, and your leadership in the museum and your art history background was formed in Europe, where the government plays a very big part, enormous role, whereas in this country it's philanthropy that sponsors and supports. And it occurred to me that Acadia National Park is an outdoor museum, that it is constructed through the patronage of land and land holdings, and it brought together by people who owned the land and then wanted it to be conserved, which is comparable to the museum. And many of those who made have supported Acadia National Park, made great museums in Philadelphia from their holdings in Detroit, in Washington, for example, the Kogut's, and of course the Rockefellers, Abby Aldrich Rockefeller, the Museum of Modern Art, and John D. Rockefeller Junior, Senior, Junior, the cloisters. So I thought there was an interesting sort of connection between the two. So tell me very quickly, how would you compare what's going on, the tensions in the museum world here, and what's going on in Europe?
So, very different systems. Again, all European museums or even the form of governance of a country, and taking France, for example, that was the influence for a lot of countries, even Mexico City, or Mexico as a country, has the influence of what was the Napoleon Code and how he structured government, but it's a centralized government. So again, the Louvre being one of the first encyclopedic museums open to the public, the fruit of the French Revolution, that these royal collections that had been the privilege only of the court and the kings open up now finally for the people. The people demanded almost the Louvre, and that becomes an experience of democratization. But even then, the French system, you have a system that is based on the government supplying for the arts. And while it's great, and I think many of my colleagues in Europe enjoy that guarantee that the government is always supporting, the very young nation of America, when it starts collecting, when it starts thinking about heritage, it's inspired by those encyclopedic museums. But I think the radical difference is, first of all, most of institutions are younger, like 200 years max, but there are built with the civic pride of private individuals that, just like Mr. Nelson and Ms. Atkins saying, a city needs a great museum because that is what will enlighten. And again, it's the universal substract that is behind all these museums, that notion that knowledge can be accomplished and brought forward if we have great testaments of the cultures of the world. And so that principle of the encyclopedia is something that I still want to save. When everything is being shambled, let's maintain our notion and the notion of progress and the notion of the encyclopedia of knowledge. Knowledge coming together can bring us together. So those are things. Now, what we depend, all of us, institutions, college, the college too, is in private philanthropy. But what the good about that, and why I think that it has become a much more democratic process, and it's that each society, each community puts their love and their resources into creating things they care for. And so cities and the community leaders and the great civic leaders will cherish, and I think today it's the charities that they're being supported, education through colleges and schools, hospitals, and to the wealth care of the people, and also our cultural institutions. And I think we have a more diversified and more rich number of cultural institutions in the US because of that. Otherwise, it's much more centralized. So I've seen the two systems, and as much as in these days, it's like, well, we should not depend on individuals. We should depend on the government. You hear my colleagues in Europe, it's like, we wish we had individuals and patrons like you have, because that would be moving forward. So the grass looks always green on the other side, I guess. That would be the answer.
One other thing before we go to questions. I recently read Julian Barnes's latest book on, I don't remember the title, but it's about death. I'm not sure why I was reading it, but in any case, he says, the imagination is stimulated more fully by words, which suggest vast ideas, than specific details of the appearance of things. It was for this reason that primarily that painting could only struggle into second place against poetry in the attempt to produce art that was sublime.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of that?
So what Judy didn't know when she invited me is that my PhD is on the notion of the total work of art, the Gesamtkunstwerk. And in that, I had to say, and this is a conversation that has been happening for centuries. The Greeks already were saying, is painting better than sculpture? Which one is more abstract? Which one is more, and there's qualities. Or music. Music is the most elevated one, not even poetry. So there's been always fighting. But what I would say is, here in this numerous audience, I could ask each of you, what is more important? Some of you will say, poetry or a great novel moves me more than any painting in the world. Others will say, there's never been a poem that inspires me as much as this painting or that sculpture or music. And so I think it's good that a poet or defends poetry. I think each of us choose our tools according to what we are moved. But I think I would still keep it for all the arts. And in trying to study the notion of the total work of art, I think there is always this aspiration for artists to try to come up with an art that is engulfing and subsuming all the arts and taking it to the next level. But I think all of you have, at one point or another, had an experience that was an epiphany with art. And some has been, like our colleague from the Med, from Islamic art. And you don't need to be from that part of the world to all of a sudden be moved. One of my greatest examples at one point that I used to love as the poster child of what diversity is in the world, but also how you can be whoever you want to be, was Carlos Picon, who was a curator of Greek and Roman art for the Met. And this is a man that was born in Puerto Rico, raised through college, then went to Oxford, and becomes one of the greatest experts on Greek and Roman. And that is what we aspire all to do, is that one can study whatever field one is moved by and become one of the greatest experts. And again, no condition or precondition should limit our possibilities. And again, as arts go, be my guest, enjoy whichever makes it for you, Judy. Just go with it.
Well, Sheila said in her talk, art is art. It was really very simple. You just sort of know what it is. Did I get that right? So, Julian,
that cannot be described by any other terms but moves you dramatically, that's art. Perhaps.
Okay.
Perhaps.
So, shall we have a few questions, and after the questions we will have a kind of...
We'll do a performance.
We're going to do
A
performance.
performance for you guys, yes.
Okay. So, questions, and there are mics. Please. Yeah.
Thank you both very much. I just was curious if you could comment on the role that you see in art, museums, all the arts, the role of risk.
The role of risk. I think, so it's such a nuance and such a rich question that we could go in so many. I think what I feel the job of the museum director today is that we need to find always the right balances. The balances between pushing the envelope of an understanding of where arts are going, and that we're following the artists. So the ones who are taking all the risks in many instances are the artists. We're just following where the art is taking us. But the most important thing that I would define for a museum like ours, and for most museums, is two things. We are built on trust. Trust is the most important thing, that it's our currency. So trust that the works that you come and see in our places are authentic. So authenticity is a big thing. But because of that, because if you're coming to see a collection, you want to make sure that what you're seeing is authentic, and authentic in all the meanings, and there's many ways of looking even to the notion of authenticity. So that you can be trusting us as an institution that what you'll see is quality and excellence, and that you can have things that you don't like or things that you feel challenged by, but knowing that there's trust, we become the place where those dialogues, those difficult dialogues can become, that you can open yourself because you know that as a museum, we're caring, we're respectful of our audience, we are looking for the excellence so that the choices have been made. So I want to take risks, but risks that are within the parameters of the trust that I will never break. No? So that would be the way to answer that. And I think that is our utmost currency, the currency of trust. There's another question over there. The
would
mic
you
is coming
the
because I
mic.
think also we're live streaming this, and it's great. The system for live streaming it and recording is
I
great.
thought that amazing art had to be in museums until we saw some of the fabulous murals when we visited Medellin in Colombia. And I was wondering if you could say a word about that genre of amazing artwork. Street
Well,
art.
About mural art or public art. Or, you know, actually public art is becoming more and more relevant and important today. And so what I would say about that is perhaps you were moved, and now I'm putting words, by the fact that you encountered art somewhere that you were not expecting. When you go to a museum, you're prepared, you want experience, and again, there's where I said, and our responsibility is to be very a place of trust. But when you're in the public domain, when you're in the public sphere, and there's a piece of art, first of all, those pieces of art have to be amazing, because with the cacophony of visual stimulus that we have in every city that we walk, a piece of art becomes like an oasis. It seizes your imagination. And that is a moment of breathing in that opens your heart and your understanding. So I think great public art also is difficult to come by. And public art at one point, also at the turn of the 19th century, were generally big sculptures with a horse sometimes, someone with a big... and generally those people had a reason to be there. And today we're conflicted because they were worthy of being in the public domain. And so there's a lot of conversations around that. Some are even coming down. But great art, and today, let me put a plug into this, and maybe you'll Google our museum, NelsonAtkins.org, and see a little bit of art. We're doing a piece of art that is just amazing. And we had the fortune and the luck to be able to work with Andy Goldsworthy, a British artist. And come to think about it, this is a project that we initiated thanks to the Whole Family Foundation that wanted to honor the couple who gave us the shuttlecocks. The shuttlecocks have become the emblem of Kansas City, so that is public art. When you go there, and if anyone is seeing, has anyone seen this TV series that I think is in Netflix called Queer Eye? Show of hands. Okay, the latest edition is based on Kansas City, and we're talking with some people that it is really fun. You'll see the museum going back and forth. Plug. But so they were honoring Morton and Estelle Sosland, who commissioned that 25, 30 years ago, and was very controversial at its time. People said, big shuttlecocks, that is not art. Well, that is pop art. So art historians were totally in favor. The local newspaper from which we were founded, they didn't like it. But 25 years later, it's the icon of the city, our symbol. But going back, today the joy is having Andy Goldsworthy, a British artist that does a lot of things and interactions with nature. And he said, I want to do a walking wall. And of course, 2-3 years ago, when we first started this conversation, the term wall was not political, thank God. But the beauty of his art is that it has not become either, you know, and we've navigated. But he wanted also this wall that is crossing from one of our sculpture parks to the next one, had to cross a street and stop traffic for 2 weeks. And they're taking the stones from here to feed them in the beginning, and it's a snake that is crossing our campus and will end in November. It's the last, he's doing it 5 stages, and will end in November in a final position. And you think the community would be in arms because we're closing a 4-way lane artery. And the power of art is that people, most of them, understood the beauty and the paradox and almost the childish and incomprehensible effort to do this just for the pleasure of seeing it for a week cross the street. And so I think that is powerful public art. Yes, another question back there and then to you. And maybe you can give her the mic so she goes after.
Where am I supposed to give the mic afterwards?
No.
Okay.
Done.
Okay. There goes. So I want to come back to risk for
Yes.
just a moment. And I very much appreciated your description of the public trust that you hold and the line that you're trying to draw. But I'm also drawn back to the Picasso that you showed. And you said, hey, he couldn't show it for 10 years. because people thought it was so radical. So you know what that edge looks like because you're making judgments on the edge.
Yes.
So can you give us a glimpse of something that's still so far out there, whether or not it's a specific piece of art or just a concept that you've seen or you've come in contact where you've had to say, oh, they're not ready for it yet.
So let me tell you, there's one place that that brings contemporary artists through the Warhol Foundation. We support creative capital, and creative capital was created when the NEA was no longer giving direct grants to artists, and so this is a way to support contemporary artists and the most emergent and radical art there is. And so creative capital, if you're an artist, look at the website, apply for that. Those are great grants. And it's not only the monetary side, but also the fact that you're accompanied by a cohort of people that will help you develop your art, create contacts with people that can help you too. So it's a very well-run program, and one of the highlights of that program is every year or every 2 years you get together and you see all what these artists are doing. So many of the things that I would answer is like, oh my God, I was at a conference or where all these artists are showing things, and you're blown away. And what I'm blown away by is the fact that also today's artists are taking things into so many different levels. And for instance, sciences are working, and scientists and artists are working together and creating amazing things. And then even the frontier between art and a commercial product, it starts to blur. One thing, for instance, an artist has created, and I think botanists, friends of mine have told me that it's quite simple, but he has created an orchard of one tree that gives like 7 different fruits at different times. And that he did it not as a biology engineer, but as an artist, because he wanted to see different colors in the same tree. That's out there. And I could cite a lot of things, but even the most out there things that some of our institutions are now not wanting to miss a beat, collecting. So MoMA, and we have a curator from here, I've been hearing how they collect now performing arts. And so there is an artist that does performing arts, and for instance, one is a couple giving a kiss to themselves for hours on end in a gallery. And so how do you buy that? How do you acquire that? And actually the artist doesn't want a contract, wants a handshake, and doesn't want to give the institution a receipt for the exchange of money that happened. So those are even challenges. Artists are pushing the boundaries always, even how to interact with the museums and making us adjust to their right. So Tino Segal, this is the artist I'm mentioning that does this kind of performance and everything. And you enter a space and you see this and you don't know if this is 2 people or if it's a performance. Now, of course, once you know that it's a performance, you will never not know that it's a performance. But a lot of people enter the space where a Tino Segal performance is going on, and you're just in awe of what's happening. So there's so many of those things that I could go on and on. But you were also asking the question is, when as an institution, and so for instance, we're slow to react as big museums that have 5,000 years of history, sometimes slower to react than we would want. It's good that we have the Kemper Museum next to us that is a only contemporary art institution, so sometimes they can do things that we might not be doing, or sometimes we do things in cohort.
I think
There was one last question here, and
Mary.
she has already
Mary,
the mic.
yes.
Yes.
Yes, Mary.
Thank you. You were talking about, I mean, a lot of this is pushing the boundaries of how we look at art, how we receive art. And so I want to go from the actual art objects, the paintings, all of that, back to the museum and the museum's role as a steward and the presenter.
Yes.
And I'm really interested in how you are viewing the whole issue of signage today and the whole issue of how you are communicating about the art, the artist, the history, and how you are supporting dialogue and understanding through your use of signage, and are you pushing your boundaries in relationship to that?
Well, you just opened the greatest question that has education departments and curatorial departments in dialogue and conflict. So the label, which you see, or the wall text that you see as you enter a gallery, is perhaps one of the most important tools that we have to convey a sense of what the gallery is about, the period is about, and it is also the turf of war of curators and educators alike. Most curators would want to have their PhD dissertation
On the label.
in that label. And we can do it because microfilms can fit it in. But no one can stand reading for hours a PhD dissertation. So, and on the other side, educators are trying to also sometimes find what is the level of reading that most of our visitors will have to get them. And that is a tug of war. It's a tug of war because on the one side, you could dumb it down. The opposite is dumbing it up. If I were to only speak in jargon about the most, and eliminate half of the audience, that would not be a joyful experience. So where do we find a common ground? And so the common ground is, and I think John yesterday was amazing about that, because John was saying when he had to write those vignettes for each of the book, he had to have in mind a public that is a general public, educated, who's they're reading already the Wall Street Journal, or the Washington Post. So it's an educated, but on the other side, it's not our peers or scholars only. So we're trying to find that balance. And for me, that balance becomes in when you create a narrative that seeds curiosity and doesn't impede continuous circle of learning upwards, So what I want is an entry point that at a certain moment of interest, you would gather what was the concept behind a room, or what is the principle of a painting, some elements that give you and feed you enough to foster curiosity and that will incite you to learn more. So, and I've had these conversations all my life, all my professional life, and at different points and at different junctures of my functions in museums or in society. And one of the things that I always like to sum it up with is saying, all of us professionals that got PhDs in art history or things, that was the consequence that our thirst for learning more was never satisfied enough with those labels. But we didn't start with a PhD. And we do not want people to feel that you have to have a PhD to enter the museum. What we want to give them is the thirst, so maybe of the hundreds of thousands of visitors we have, 1 or 2 will become art historians, We still need some of those, and we want to encourage that. And it's a great path, but we cannot begin by telling them everything. You have to let them discover. So that would be the short answer. Now, my hope and my trust is that we all have a cell phone right now with us. So we have now a technique, and we're developing, and again, no one in the museum world has the best and ultimate results. And if there's someone that knows what is the best technology for museums, let me know. But right now, you can come up close to a piece of art and just put it in your camera, and then it tells you the label. I love that, because with my sight going down, I don't want to go all the way, read the label, go back, see the painting. So more. But that also can start giving you all the paintings that you start liking. And if you say like, they'll save them. And then you go back home and say, hey, what was this? And then also, not only I give you the label, but if we have x-rays of the painting and you're interested in conservation and conservation science, you press that and you see there are x-rays. And again, what technology will allow us finally to deliver, that has always been the dream, is that we'll give you the label, printed label, the very beginning of a conversation. But if you're interested, and I can loop you into getting and discovering, because that is the painting you like, that will take you to our website and then give you reference of scholarly books that you might want to read. So that there is hope in technology. We're still not 100% there yet.
So I think we have to end, but
Yes.
before we do that, we want to share some thoughts about, I think, what is probably the most important topic that we have talked about and are thinking about, and that is that today we are immersed in the history and the contemporary existence of racial wounds inflicted and racial wounds endured. And we have to work on both aspects. And there'll be no resolution in this country in working towards democracy without acknowledging both the damage of the wounds and the wounds that are inflicted and the wounds that are endured. And so this is particularly true, I think, as the president exacerbates the tensions and conflates them with immigration. So we would like to end by reading a poem which Mary Morgan suggested to us. We won't read all of it, but parts of it. It's called In This Place, in American Lyric, and it's by Amanda Gorman. And it's an original poem written for the inaugural reading of Poet Laureate Tracy K. Smith at the Library of Congress. There's a poem in this place, in the foothills, in the footfalls in the halls, in the quiet beat of the seats. It is here at the curtain of day where America writes a lyric you must whisper to say. There's a poem in this place in the heavy grace, the lined face of this noble building, collections burned and reborn twice. There's a poem in Boston's Copley Square, and it goes on. There's a poem in Charlottesville. There's a poem in that great sleeping giant of Lake Michigan, defiantly raising its blue head to Milwaukee and Chicago. There's a poem in Florida, in East Texas. There's a poem in Los Angeles, yawning wide as the Pacific tide, where a single mother swelters in a windowless classroom, teaching black and brown students in Watts to spell out their thoughts so her daughter might write this poem for you. A truth that you can't stop a dreamer or knock down a dream.
How could this not be her city, su nación, our country, our America, our American lyric to write, a poem by the people, the poor, the Protestant, the Muslim, the Jew, the naive, the native, the immigrant, the black, the brown, the blind, the brave, the undocumented and undeterred, the woman, the man, the non-binary, the white, the trans, the ally to all of the above and more. There's a poem in this place, a poem in America, a poet in every American who writes this nation, who tells a story worthy of being told on this minnow of an earth, to breathe hope into the palimpsest of time, a poet in every American who sees that our poem penned does not mean our poem's end. There's a place where this poem dwells. It is the here, it is now, it is the yellow song of Duane's bell, where we write an American lyric and we're just beginning to tell. Thank you.
Thank you. Bravo.
So I think ending on a poem, and you had some visual images, so you can decide if poetry makes it more for you, but we definitely wanted to end it with a poem, with art,
With
again,
art,
with the voice of
exactly.
an artist.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was great.
It was.
Oh.
Would you like us to step down?
No, I would just like to thank you one more time. And join us, yes. Join us for a drink and another yet more calories, and that'd be great. And thank all of you. This has been a wonderful week, and I look forward to what we come up with next year. Bye.
Thank you.